Hey everybody, Matt Kalogly here with SRP Medical Marketing and the Warner James Group, and today I want to share with you one of my favorite lines that I've always heard when I first got involved in medical. One of my doctors shared this line with me, and I think it's apropos when it comes to building your business and or making it survive, and that's this phrase: all bleeding eventually stops. Think about that. Okay, so from a patient standpoint, right, at some point all the bleeding is going to stop, right? It's going to stop one of two ways. The patient's either dead, or we've been able to find the source of the bleeding and we've been able to make it stop. Well, your medical practice and the success of your medical practice, whether it's an insurance-based practice or whether it's a cash-based practice, is exactly the same. It's that same concept, that all bleeding eventually stops. Now, unfortunately, that bleeding can lead to death. If you don't identify the bleeding in your practice, a lot of times you can bleed out. And unfortunately, sometimes the worst thing is that you bleed out slowly. Now, if you really, there's probably nothing worse for you as a doctor. I gotta switch hands here. There's probably nothing worse for you as a doctor than not knowing where the bleeding is coming from, okay? I'll never forget that when my mom was coming towards the end of her life, she developed some kind of a slow internal bleeding, and that's what eventually killed her, right? They couldn't find where the bleeding was. She was old. She was 85. She had a great life, so, I appreciate in advance any kind comments, but, sometimes it's just the end was there, right? But the reality is that the doctors wanted to find the bleeding, right? But they couldn't because it was so small, it was so slow. But if you have a patient that comes in, and let's say you're working in the ER, and that patient is hemorrhaging, you know exactly where the bleeding has come from, and you know exactly how to fix it. Well, the thing is that you probably don't know where the small leaks are, where the holes are, where the bleeding out is happening in your medical practice, and that's going to lead to a very slow and painful death. So what I want to talk to you about today is how to stop the bleeding so that you're on the good side of the bleeding ending and not the bad side. Okay, so bear with me here. I'm kind of a selfie newbie here, selfie stick newbie, but I have a couple of things here. So you'll see here I have a board laid out. Let me back up over here. So I have a board laid out. Okay, you're going to see that I have 3 circles right there. And on one side right here, I have the word the wilderness. And I have another word right here called the promised land. Now, most practices that I know are trying to get to the promised land. And the promised land looks like this. There's not only milk and honey, but you're making, say, $150,000 a month in your medical practice at a minimum. Hopefully you're scaling up to doing $200,000 to $400,000 a month. You have a couple of PAs working for you. You're only dealing with the larger cases. You're not having to deal with the rank and file. Okay, people are paying more money for access. You might even have a cash-based business, medical practice that you have started that's in the same building or on this next door or something like that, that's giving you even more financial freedom, okay? You're able to put big chunks of money away. You're taking nice vacations with your family. You're not staying at the old Halodome on Highway 77 where the pool doesn't work, but you're actually staying at the nicer place, maybe even the 4-star places, right? Well, over here, we have the wilderness, okay? Now, the wilderness is fraught with challenges. In the wilderness, how you know you're in the wilderness is that if you keep going round and round and round. The definition of being crazy is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, you're in the wilderness if your practice is topping out. It's not really able to get beyond that $25,000 to $50,000 a month. You're making an okay living, but you're one natural catastrophe away from the whole thing just going down in flames, okay? All right, so what do we do? Well, let me talk about the 3 rocks. And I've talked about this before, but I want to talk about it in a little bit more detail. Let's set this down, okay? So the first rock I want to talk about right here, there we go. We're going to talk about it right there. There we go, okay. Is that we're going to talk about right here, this rock is survival, okay? Now, I want you to think about these rocks. These are rocks that you use to cross the river into the promised land, okay? So, let me back this up here a little bit so hopefully you can see that. So you'll see me bouncing, going from rock to rock. Okay, so the first rock is, are you surviving, okay? Now, if you're surviving, then you can go to the next rock, which is stability, okay? Now, the problem with these 2 rocks is these are very close together, and you can bounce back and forth between these 2 rocks multiple times, okay? you get out of survival mode, you have a good couple of months, and then all of a sudden you get to stability and you feel like you're finally breaking through, and what happens? Snowstorm hits, rainstorm hits, natural catastrophe hits, spring break hits, people are out of town for the summer, whatever the deal is, but you just keep going back and forth between survival and stability. Okay? The place that you want to get to is that we want to go from stability to scale. Okay? Okay, so there you go. Stability to scale. Okay? Now, when we get to scale, it's much easier for us to get to the promised land. Now, scale isn't always necessarily about adding more facilities. Scale could be just growing your existing facility. All right? It could be, there's a lot of different versions. It isn't always about having multiple facilities. It can be just having one facility that just really kicks butt. Maybe you're doing some cash business over on the side. Okay? But let's talk about the survival one, because I got a feeling this is where a lot of you are. Okay? In order for this bleeding to stop, you have to really know what's going on in your practice. And the reality is that you probably don't. You probably don't really understand what's going on in your practice, and let me explain, okay? I had a conversation today with a clinic. I won't mention where, but they are a pain management clinic, and they're watching their reimbursement rates go down and down and down. Sound familiar? Okay? And their story went something like this, okay? Their story went something like this, and that is, they said, well, our practice, we have a pain management side and we have an aesthetic side of our practice. And we used to be doing about $1.2 to $1.3 million a year. And now we're significantly less than that. And I said, okay, hold on one second. Let me see if I got this right. I want to make sure that if I understand your story, tell me if there's anything that I'm missing. I said, okay. I said, you used to do about $1.2 million a year, and that a large portion of that came from the pain management practice, where you probably did about $800,000 to $900,000 a year. Yeah. And then you decided that, what we're going to do is we're going to diversify, because you attended some event, and they said what you need to do is you need to open up a cash-based practice so that you can have the cash coming in, and then eventually what you're going to do is you're going to phase out the pain management clinic, and you're going to have this cash-based clinic. They're like, yeah. And I said, and guess what? What happened is that over the last 3 years, those reimbursement rates in your pain management clinic have gone significantly down from like 180 to 150 to 120, that in some cases you're probably just getting $75 reimbursement rate. And now what's happening is that you don't have enough money to really keep the pain management clinic going, and the aesthetics clinic, you'd like to get it going, but you don't have enough money to really kind of launch that and get it right and going. You've tried a couple of things to kind of Facebook ads and things of that nature to get that pain management clinic going, but it really hasn't worked, and what's happening is you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. Dead silence on the phone. And the doctor was like, how did you know all that? And I said, because this is what we do every single day. And we know exactly the challenges that you're facing, okay? So what we did is we had a conversation about survival, okay? Now, survival is not about adding another ad campaign. We don't want ad campaign. I'm just going to put camp. We don't want to do another ad campaign. That's not going to get you out of this hole. What we have to do is we've got to build this foundation, okay? And by building the foundation of your practice, type this out here. By building the foundation of your practice, it's going to give us stability. Now, what happens when we have stability? When you have stability, when you have money in the bank, you can start to make much better decisions. Now, if you think back to times when you've had a little bit of money, or maybe you were just starting out, and when you don't have money, you can have a tendency to operate scared. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're operating from a place where we're getting a good night's rest, that we're able to make really good decisions. And it's really hard to do that if you don't have cash in the bank, if you're always worried about where that next check is coming from. So the first thing we've got to do is we've got to move you from survival mode to stability mode, okay? And stability mode is we want to see, 3 months operating cash in the bank, okay? Maybe even 6 months, okay? And we want to know that we have systems in place so that things can start to run without us. So we want to have 3 months in the bank, and we also want to have systems in place. It's only after we get money in the bank in 3 to 6 months and we have systems in place about how you do things that scale is achievable, okay? So you gotta build the foundation first, all right? You have to do that. Again, how do we stop the bleeding? We gotta find the bleeding. Think about this. I'm gonna leave you, I want you to think about this. Imagine if you did, that you had a patient come into your practice and that patient said, I'm not feeling very well. And instead of running a blood panel, instead of getting their blood pressure, instead of looking at all their vitals, instead of getting their pulse rate, what you did is you just handed them a Z-Pack and said, get better. Well, that's what a lot of people do with their medical practice, is they don't really do a full analysis. They don't really look at the blood panel. You can look at a blood panel and you can tell me what's going on with me, right? If I were to send you my blood work, if I were on a blood panel, a lipid panel, the whole thing, and I were to send that to you, you could tell me what we need to do. That's what we do. Okay? We do that for you because what we're going to do, in order for you to get out of being sick, okay, from you to get out of being in survival mode, we're going to look at all your vitals. We develop a plan for you. And then what we're going to do is we're going to build a foundation, just like if you had a patient. If you had a patient that came in and it was hemorrhaging, you'd want to stabilize the bleeding, stop the bleeding. Then what you want to do is you want to rebuild the blood, either through blood transfusions, and you're going to find out what caused that. Maybe if it was a gunshot wound, it's one thing. If it's something else, it's another, right? You've got all these things that you can do, you can take a look at. It's the exact same thing that we do so that we can build stability, right? You want that patient to be stable. And then when you release them, you want to see them get to their version of scale is them getting healthier, stronger, so that they can go back to living a full life. This is what we want to do for you, okay? Now look, I'm gonna end with this, is that I'm gonna bet that if you've been watching these videos, you probably fall into one of these 3 categories. You're in survival mode, you are stable and you don't want to go back to survival mode, or you want to get to scale, okay? Sorry, this is a little jumpy, but anyway. Well, you can't just get there by trying to do the exact same thing. Let's get you into the promised land right here. All right, let's get you into the promised land. Let's get you out of the survival mode. Phone rang. Survival, let's get you out of survival to stability, and let's get you from stability to scale, okay? If you would like to find out more, all you have to do is private message me and type the word scale, or you can type it below, and I'll be more than happy to talk to you about how we can do this. If you are getting less than $100, or if you're actually getting less than $200 in reimbursement rates on your insurance payments, why don't you give us a call, because we can take that to $350. And if you're a cash-based practice, let's talk, because we work with both. All right, this is Matt with SRP Medical Marketing and the Warner James Group. Thank you for listening. Have a great day, everybody.